Your group numbers somewhere between 25 and 50 people. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar's research, published across several decades and synthesized in his 1992 paper on social brain evolution, established that this range is not a coincidence. It is a cognitive and logistical sweet spot, large enough to defend, cooperate, and share labor, small enough to manage trust, remember obligations, and move quickly when you need to. Your group moves. This is the first thing to understand. The Ice Age did not produce sedentary people. It produced some of the most mobile humans who ever lived. Archaeological evidence from sites like Sunghir in Russia, dated to around 34,000 years ago, shows that Ice Age humans were tracking and following megafauna, which means the enormous animals of the Pleistocene epoch. Ice sheets up to 3 kilometers thick covered vast stretches of what is now Scandinavia, Britain, Canada, and Russia. Sea levels were about 120 meters lower than they are right now, meaning coastlines looked nothing like they do today, and entire land masses existed that have since been swallowed by rising water. How did anyone survive this? That is not a rhetorical question. It is one of the most intensely studied puzzles in paleoanthropology, which is the scientific field concerned with the origins and evolution of human life. And the answers, when you actually look at them, reveal something extraordinary about what your body and brain are capable of. Let's go back to that tree line. You are not alone. You are never alone in this world. Survival as an isolated individual in the Ice Age is not a real option. The wind hits you first. Not the kind of wind you feel walking to your car in January. Something older, something that pushes through skin and settles into bone before you even register it. You are standing at the edge of a tree line that no longer exists, somewhere in what will one day be called Northern Europe. The year is approximately 20,000 BCE. The last glacial maximum is at its peak, and the world you are looking out at is almost entirely white. This is the Ice Age, and somehow, your ancestors not only survived it, they thrived in it. For roughly 100,000 years, anatomically modern humans coexisted with one of the most hostile climates this planet has ever produced. Temperatures in northern Eurasia dropped 10 to 20 degrees Celsius below what they are today. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave bears, aurochs, giant deer with antlers spanning 3.5 meters. These animals migrated seasonally, and your ancestors migrated with them. Your survival is structured around two things: warmth and calories. Everything else flows from those. Let's talk about warmth first, because this is where most people underestimate what your ancestors actually figured out. Clothing. Not the rough animal skins draped loosely over the body that old illustrations suggested. Actual fitted clothing. Sewn clothing. Clothing so sophisticated that when researchers like Bruce Bradley and Dennis Sangoth examined the bone needle assemblages recovered from Upper Paleolithic sites across Europe and Siberia, they concluded that Ice Age people were producing tailored, layered garments. Bone needles with true eyes small enough to thread sinew through have been recovered at sites in Russia dated to 45,000 years ago. That is not a coincidence. Needles of that precision are not decorative objects. They are tools for producing fitted seams. Researchers examining the Sunghir burial site, which is one of the most significant Ice Age archaeological discoveries ever made, found the remains of a man and 2 children buried in clothing decorated with thousands of mammoth ivory beads. The beads had been sewn in patterns consistent with layered upper and lower body garments, boots, and a hat. Experimental archaeologists who attempted to recreate the bead pattern estimated that the original clothing would have taken thousands of hours to produce. These were not people improvising. These were people with craft traditions. Think about what that means. In the middle of a glacial maximum, surrounded by predators and cold and unpredictable food sources, your ancestors were investing enormous amounts of time into producing beautiful, precisely made clothing. That is not the behavior of a species barely hanging on. That is the behavior of a species that has solved enough immediate problems to think ahead. Now the calories. This is the second pillar of Ice Age survival, and it is stranger than you might expect. The Ice Age was not a landscape of scarcity, it was a landscape of dangerous abundance. Large-bodied animals store enormous amounts of fat. Fat is calorie-dense in a way that lean muscle is not, and fat is exactly what your body needs to maintain core temperature in extreme cold. Not all of it edible immediately, but much of it storable. In freezing temperatures, meat does not rot quickly. The environment itself was a refrigerator. But hunting a woolly mammoth is not something one person does, or even 5 people. The coordinated hunts that paleoanthropologists have reconstructed from sites like Predmostí in the Czech Republic, where the remains of over 1,000 mammoths have been recovered in a single location, required planning, communication, and collective action at a scale that reflects a genuinely complex social intelligence. You drove animals, you used fire to create barriers, you used terrain, choosing river crossings, narrow valleys, and cliff edges where large animals became manageable. Researcher Will Robrooks and his colleagues studying fire use in European Paleolithic sites published evidence suggesting that controlled fire had been a reliable tool for at least 300,000 years before the peak of the Last Glacial Maximum. Your ancestors were not learning to use fire during the Ice Age. They had already mastered it. So let's reconstruct a day. It is deep winter. The temperature outside your shelter is somewhere around -25 degrees Celsius. The sun, where you are in northern Eurasia, will be above the horizon for perhaps 5 hours. You are inside. Your shelter is not a cave, although caves were used when available. At this point in the Ice Age, many of your group's shelters were semi-subterranean structures dug partially into the ground for insulation, framed with the bones of large animals, and covered with stretched hides weighted down by more bones or stones. At sites like Mezhyrich in Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of 5 such shelters, constructed almost entirely from the bones and tusks of woolly mammoths. These were not improvised, they were engineered. Inside, a fire burns low. You are not alone. The group sleeps in close proximity, which means shared body heat. Children sleep near adults. Elders hold knowledge that the group cannot afford to lose. The warmth is collective. When the light comes, the skilled hunters go out, not everyone. The group does not expose all of its able-bodied members to risk simultaneously. Some stay behind to process yesterday's kill, rendering fat, scraping hides, maintaining tools, caring for children, feeding those who cannot move easily. Division of labor in Ice Age groups was not a modern invention, it was a survival strategy. And then there is the cognitive dimension. This is the counterintuitive part. The Ice Age did not just select for stronger bodies or better weapons, it selected for minds that could hold abstract information, plan across time, and communicate complex ideas. The explosion of symbolic culture that archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, which began roughly 40,000 to 50,000 years ago in Europe and earlier in Africa, produced cave paintings, carved figurines, musical instruments, and personal ornaments. This happened in the middle of severe climatic stress. Ian Davidson and William Noble, researchers who have written extensively on the evolution of language and symbolic thought, argued that the Ice Age was not despite which symbolic culture flourished, but partly because of which it flourished. Long winters with limited movement created time, dense social groups created the need for sophisticated communication. The challenge of coordinating complex hunts created selection pressure for planning, memory, and shared mental models of the world. The cave paintings at Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain, some of the most astonishing human artifacts ever discovered, were made by people living inside a glacial world. They were not made by people who were merely surviving. They were made by people who were thinking. Here is what the Ice Age actually tells us about your body. You are built for this. Your thermoregulation is not a passive process. Your body adjusts. It has always adjusted. Research by Damian Bailey and colleagues published in work on cold acclimatization in humans shows that regular exposure to cold produces measurable physiological changes, including increased metabolic heat production, altered blood flow patterns, and shifts in fat distribution toward cold-insulating brown adipose tissue. Your ancestors were not born into the Ice Age cold and simply enduring it. Over generations and within individual lifetimes, they adapted to it, and yet, the Ice Age ended roughly 11,700 years ago. The glaciers retreated, the megafauna disappeared, hunted and climate-stressed into extinction. Your ancestors, who had organized their entire lives around large animal hunting, faced a world reorganizing itself without the creatures that had structured their survival. What they did next is another story entirely, but here is what matters now. You woke up this morning in a heated room, wearing clothing assembled from materials refined over thousands of years of technological tradition. Eating food that exists because of the agricultural revolution that followed the Ice Age, every system surrounding you was built by descendants of people who looked out at a world covered in ice and did not give up. They just built better clothing.